Thank you for downloading from Ravi Zacharias International Ministries. Support for this podcast comes from your generous gifts and donations. You can find out more about Ravi Zacharias and the team at www.rzim.org.
Part of our failure to get thinking people to take the gospel seriously is born out of a credibility gap. We claim Christianity is true, a claim which is awesome by contemporary standards. But then we whittle down our claims by the patent incongruity of our practices of the truth. The way we operate speaks louder than what we say.
Hello and welcome to a new week here on Just Thinking. We're facing many different battles, two of which, though almost polar opposites, are united in one thing: their attacks on Christianity. The new spiritualists and the new atheists continue to dominate the bestseller list with ideas supposedly discounting the Christian faith. So with all these views in mind, how do we defend the gospel of Jesus Christ? Here's Ravi with today's message, Defending the Faith We Live.
You know, it's hard when you're talking about apologetics to know which angle from which to approach that particular audience. Apologetics is in our blood. It undergirds all of our evangelism. We are always aware not just of the question, but the questioner, because there's no point answering the question if you're not dealing with the questioner. If you don't understand the context, then your answer becomes a pretext, and it really doesn't get anywhere. But at the time in which we live, so many voices were alerting us to where we were headed. I only had the privilege of meeting Francis Schaeffer once in my life, shortly before he died. I was at that time a professor in Nyack, and Dr. Schaeffer was quite weakening, I think, with his cancer by that point, and he sat through his entire lecture. But I remember sitting next to him and just feeling so blessed to see that right till the last days of his journey, he was committed not only to responding to his times, but anticipating the times. If you read Schaeffer's writings, notwithstanding all the criticism that some schools of thought would want to have for him, he was really quite a prophet in his times. His book, The God Who Is There, and the one on the book of Jeremiah, particularly Death in the City, which was not often read, was telling us of where we were headed. One of the protégés of Dr. Francis Schaeffer was none other than Os Guinness. And Os started writing very well and very meaningfully. And I remember, although I wasn't at the conference because I was fresh in the ministry, and remember, in fact, I was speaking in Cambodia at that time. I was just out of my college days and so on, and got a hold of this manuscript. It was a talk that Guinness delivered at the Lausanne Covenant for World Evangelism in 1974. See if not what he was saying was very appropriate for then and for now. Why is there such a constant disparagement of the mind? Why is there so much appeal to the emotions and so little content presupposed on which to decide? Why all this talk of souls and so little talk of whole people? Why the obvious exploitation of the testimony of the famous? Why is it so often the case that the more simplistic the message, the more sophisticated the techniques? A host of other questions spring to my mind, which we must ask ourselves. For example, why have so few intelligent people seriously considered Christ today? Can it partly be because our apologetics are too academic, too polemic, and almost completely confined to an inter-seminary debate among Christians? Why do non-Christians generally raise questions and see errors before Christians do? Example, the rising disquiet and the grave dangers over the commercialization of the gospel. They are not slow to notice the blatant materialism and sometimes open lies which characterize much advertising in some Christian magazines. Part of our failure to get thinking people to take the gospel seriously is born out of a credibility gap. We claim Christianity is true, a claim which is awesome by contemporary standards. But then we whittle down our claims by the patent incongruity of our practices of the truth. The way we operate speaks louder than what we say. Without the practice of truth, evangelism is in danger of becoming a giant institutional mouth, or as E.M. Foster dismissed it scornfully, poor, talkative little Christianity. 35 years ago, they could see this coming. And I remember fresh out of my undergraduate reading that again and again. I was not in an apologetic ministry at that time. In fact, I was just starting my studies at Trinity in doing my graduate work, and I'd started to study under Norman Geisler and John Warwick Montgomery, John Gerstner, J.I. Packer, John Stott, I. Howard Marshall. At that time, even Clark Pinnock was from the evangelical stripe. Each passing day, one never knows what Clark Pinnock believes, but he's changed it time and time and time again. But at that time, I just entered my graduate work in apologetics, and what Schaeffer and Guinness and all was saying turned out to be prophetically true. How shall we then live? It is also interesting that on the heels of Alistair McGrath's book, The Twilight of Atheism, the atheists seem to have sprung to life again. I was with Norman Geisel last week, and he said atheism is dead, but the atheists are very much alive. And what he meant by that is that there's no new argument from them, no new philosophical counter-perspective, but they're just shouting louder, and they're much more strident. Having said that, let me make one other introductory comment and then move into some answers, hopefully. I've never been able to track down the source of this, but it always is a reminder to me of how we came this route. Someone wrote this: in the 1950s, kids lost their innocence. They were liberated from their parents by well-paying jobs, cars, and lyrics in music that gave rise to a new term, the generation gap. In the 1960s, kids lost their authority. It was the decade of protest. Church, state, and parents were all called into question and found wanting. Their authority was rejected, yet nothing ever replaced it. In the 1970s, kids lost their love. It was the decade of meism, dominated by hyphenated words beginning with self, self-image, self-esteem, self-assertion. It made for a very lonely world. Kids learned everything there was to know about sex, forgot everything there was to know about love, and very few had the nerve to tell them there was indeed a difference. In the 1980s, kids lost their hope, stripped of innocence, authority, and love, and plagued by the horror of a nuclear nightmare. Large and growing numbers of this generation have stopped believing in the future. Now, obviously, somebody wrote this at the tail end of the 80s or the early 90s. So I want to add a footnote to it. It is this: in the 1990s, kids lost their power to reason. Lost in the world of cyberspace, they have personalized objects and totally subjectivized reality. They have personalized objects and totally subjectivized reality. It is not at all uncommon on a given night for a young man or a young woman to be entranced before a machine, be it a computer or a television set, where we can get idiotized night after night and cease to think clearly anymore. But the young person is more engaged with reality through a box than with people and ideas and relationships. It's a fearsome thing, very fearsome. My son is a techie. He's always pressing buttons. And even when we're having lunch, it's like this, and I'm trying to talk to him. And I say, who are you talking to? I hope you're not in the audience, because I want to talk to you and tell you stop talking to my son while I'm having lunch with him. Or just this kind of stuff. Sorry, Dad. And it's always something very innocuous, or just checking the scores, checking whether the Braves won or not. I could have told him that before he checked it. This kind of stuff that goes on again and again and again, but it takes on very serious overtones, very serious. It is not uncommon to talk to a father or mother who says, our kids have cut us out from their lives. We don't hear from them anymore. We're passé. We're done. And I had somebody recently say to me, I don't know when this all happened. He said, I don't know when this happened to my son. And the whole reality then is internalized, subjectivized. It is what is called philosophically a solipsistic universe where you are the only ultimate reality that matters and you're feeding off the inside. There's no objective personal reality out there. This is the kind of world in which we live. Now, how did all of this come about? I have traced it into the following sequence, but I want to put it side by side with the biblical narrative, okay? So let me give you 6 initial ideas that were presented in the scriptures. You see, when you look at the Holy Scriptures, there are 3 words that begin the story. Bereshith bara Elohim. Bereshith bara Elohim. In the beginning, God created. In the English language, we have 5 words. In the Hebrew language, we have 3 words. Bereshith bara Elohim. Everything from there hangs on those 3 words. In the beginning, God created. It is not accidental that the naturalists wanted to kill all of the narrative after that by taking on the first 3 words. Because they knew the importance of the peg. If you can somehow explain humanity away as a random collocation of atoms from primordial slime, here we are as thinking atoms and somehow talking morality and metaphysics and all of that we are here with no prevision, no pre-plan, no ultimate purpose, that we just happen to be on this scene. Imagine that. Think of the implications of that if it is true. If it were actually true that no person, no moral framework governed your existence, not at all surprising that it would become a very lonely planet.
You've been listening to the message, Defending the Faith We Live. Stay tuned. Ravi will be right back with Just a Thought. If you'd like to purchase a copy, call us at 1-800-448-6766. Or you can order online at rzim.org, where you can purchase any of our materials and have access to a large selection of free articles and audio downloads. In Canada, that website is rzim.ca.
This is Just a Thought with Ravi Zacharias.
I draw comfort from the fact that God always brings it down to the individual, and he says, set your house in order first. He said to Nehemiah, take the men and put them in front of their own homes. Let them build a wall in front of their own homes first. And I am confident today that if the Church of Jesus Christ sets her house in order, we will see revival break out in this land. I have no doubt about that whatsoever. And how does that begin? It begins in your life, and it begins in mine. So the finger can't be pointed there. As much as it pains you and me, I have to look this way and say, Ravi, is righteousness and justice from God the foundation of your life? Is God's voice present in my life? What a wonderful thing when you can say the glory is present, the voice of God is heard.
Helping the thinker believe and the believer think. For more information, go to rzim.org.
Just Thinking is a listener-supported radio ministry and is furnished by Ravi Zacharias International Ministries, Atlanta, Georgia. We hope you will consider praying for our ministry as we seek to encourage and equip Christians to share the gospel with gentleness and respect. If you'd like to donate, be sure to visit our website,